everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We have today a conversation between Tony Verb, the co-founder of Carbonless Asia, an innovation and investment platform specialized in technology solutions to decarbonize Asia. We also have Manish Singhai. Manish has almost 20 years of experience in a CIO or similar capacity, investing all across the region and globe to help further decarbonization and other investment priorities. And there's, of course, myself. I shouldn't forget myself. I'm a board member of the People-Centered Internet, a nonprofit dedicated to technology for humanity. And I'm also an advisor to the official Monetary and Financial Institutions Forum. We're very glad to be with you today, and to also do invite your comments and your questions on the right-hand side panel. We were lucky enough to receive some pre-questions from Meifan and from Kwazai Lee. Meifan was interested to hear about what the levers of power to make change are in our minds. And Kwazai Lee was asking about what implications we think our models have for innovation. And so as we get into our conversation, let me explain a bit about what I do before I then move on to Tony and then Manish. So at the People-Centered Internet, or PCI, we believe that the lever of power is collaboration. We work with practitioners, public bodies, and private enterprises to focus on how new innovation can be deployed in a people-centered fashion, keeping the needs of communities and humanity at the core. OMFIF, the official Monetary and Financial Institutions Forum, focuses on the role of monetary and other policies in driving changes for a resilient and sustainable global economy at scale. And so when Kwazai asked about the implications for the model, we look to connect top, middle, and bottom of the ladder to reach a more powerful, scalable solution, interoperable across the globe. That's my perspective. Tony, could you tell us a little bit about how Carbonless Asia think about innovation and technology and how they lever the model they have?
Yes, thank you, Tamara. Thank you for having me, and hello, everyone out there in the ether. We at Carbonless, and I will relate both to the topic of our panel and also to the questions. We are very much using technology and innovation for the benefit of decarbonizing Asia-Pacific's most emitting industries. And we are launching a venture capital fund that helps scale the type of technology companies that have solutions now to help decarbonize the industry, specifically energy, transport, and the built environment. But we are also looking into digital solutions. Now, how does it relate to the fourth industrial revolution? And for that, I would like to share, what my definition is of the fourth industrial revolution. Most typically, we associate the type of technologies that relate to high-speed internet, AI, artificial intelligence, automation, the use of big data analytics, and cloud technology, as well as Industry 4.0. And for years, these areas and these sectors, these technologies have been popular for investment. Now, what we care about at Carbonless is how we can apply these technologies for the benefit of fight against climate change, and within that, decarbonization, which is not only the biggest challenge of our decade and of the decades ahead, but we also define it and identify it as the most interesting and exciting opportunity of the 2020s. The fourth industrial revolution related technologies are all directly impacting decarbonization capacity, because they are bringing efficiencies to energy systems. To just start with one of the sectors that we are interested in, also building management systems and transportation systems. So when we talk about decarbonization technologies, they are always related, or most of the time related to the fourth industrial revolution related technology and innovation. Now, levers of power, we are very much thinking alike, Tamara, because we are all about collaboration. Decarbonization cannot be achieved by one investment fund, by one government. It's actually about working together, and most importantly, sharing best practices. That is our mission as well in the ecosystems of Asia Pacific, because we need to decarbonize now to hit the net zero goals of 2030, 2050, or 2070. It doesn't really matter. We need to start implementing technologies out there. And for that, industry players need to come together. Big industry players need to work together with technology companies, startups, investing in them, become their clients, their customers. Governments need to understand what is actually happening in the market in terms of technology and innovation. They need to change the regulation accordingly. So we are contributing to the exchange of ideas and hopefully the proliferation of solutions. And that's how we operate our platform. We are not merely a venture capital fund. We would like to be as collaborative and open as possible for the benefit of all of us, of ecosystems, and the benefit, of course, of our portfolio companies. So this is selfish and unselfish at the same time. And I would like to highlight here that according to the International Energy Agency's road path to net zero 2050 report that was published last year, we have 85% of the technologies that we need to achieve net zero, and 10% of further technologies are already in development. So what this means is that we need scale, and we need capital to scale these technologies, but we also need application and deployment from big industry players to scale these technologies. And that's exactly what our mission is. And we hope that through our collaborative platform, we can contribute to that.
That's incredible and very laudable, because one of the challenges we see is as we find these technologies, and you mentioned earlier the idea of proliferating the solutions as opposed to the solution providers. One of the things we find difficult is who is there providing technology or an innovation that can help us meet our goals, but where if we were to suddenly come in and invest, for the sake of argument, 150 million, we don't end up racing the acceleration in the wrong way. We don't end up being someone where they can't serve the customers because they're not able to meet the requirements that we might have on them. So really, it's about how we can bring, as investors, support to the table without burdening the companies delivering solutions. And at this point, I think a good person to hear from is Manish. Manish, you've had close to 20 years of investment experience directly choosing to partner with companies or people like Carbonless Asia to help them scale solutions or investment in solutions. How do you think about the investment process, and what motivates investors in investing into these solutions?
Sure. Let me take a step back, Tamara, before I get on to that. And that's really sort of as I sit here as in the asset manager space and look at asset owners, who I assume are the primary audience, and the facilitators and the innovators at the other end. Very simply, I see a meaningful, very meaningful interest and motivation on the part of the asset owners to actually fund technology and innovation. And I see obviously a financing need and gap at the other end. I think the devil is in the detail, really, and I'm stating the obvious there, and that in the execution space, because what I see, if we go back to the basic sort of, kind of classification of innovation between process innovation and product innovation, I think a vast majority of economic activity is still very much in the brown space, in the brownish green and the greenish brown space. And I think that's where a lot of the innovation, and this is time sensitive given the environmental, kind of challenges. And I think that's where a lot of this channelization is struggling in some ways in terms of just being defined. And what I mean by that really is that given that much of the innovation is happening or it is required in the process space in, even sort of very obvious industries like cement and steel and the works, you're really looking at, the companies themselves being in the best position to actually do this incremental process innovation. I think when we talk about product innovation, it's much more on a smaller scale, much more individual. And that's where I think a lot of the institutional asset owners find it much more challenging to actually find the scale of financing that they can provide and so on. They're too small, the product innovation part. The process innovation part is which is mainstream, where asset managers and the traditional space can actually be very active. And, that's how I would actually, hope to expand, my thoughts in over the sort of coming few minutes. And that's really sort of the process innovation part. You're talking about very incremental stuff, reducing emissions, increasing workplace safety, which has the social implications, logistics management and supply chain improvements. These are all very incremental, but very, very meaningful. And in terms of scale and financing, pretty large, where the asset owners can actually get involved, in a continuous, non-disruptive fashion. The disruptive technologies, the disruptive innovation is absolutely critical. But as I mentioned earlier, that product innovation happens at a much smaller scale, where I think firms like Tony's and that segment is in a better position, has the better capabilities to actually assess the quality, the actual sustainability, the actual efficiency of those technologies, and channelize investments. And I think that's where the asset owners and the asset managers can do best, is to delegate that due diligence and that deployment of capital to the specialists, if you will, in the product innovation space.
Yeah, one of the things that often comes up when I speak to asset owners, and having worked with an asset owner for some time, is this challenge of size, because the projects themselves are sometimes a little bit too small to be invested in with the kind of mandates we operate under. Also track records and the necessary due diligence for many asset owners anyway, to directly invest in some of these firms that are really moving the needle, or innovating with great potential. The burden of having to meet the due diligence or the reporting or all of our governance needs as fiduciaries can be very, very challenging. And so I do agree with you, Manish. I think roles in the venture side or the impact side, people like Tony, as you mentioned, give asset owners a path of access, assuming it's within mandate, to channel our resources to support these firms as they come up. And you also alluded to not just mandate challenges, but also the talent gap. And so, Tony, when I think about the work you do with alternative investors, or even directly with companies, how do you think about them, and what do you see being done that you think kind of is potentially bridging some of those challenges that the investors have?
Let me just answer the talent gap separately, and also what we see in the investment space. And I think, Manish, your breakdown of obviously the challenges and the opportunities for us, challenges overall for asset owners and large scale asset managers, and the opportunities consequently for a platform and an investment fund like Carbonless has been very smartly broken down. But what we see is indeed a very genuine interest from larger asset owners and asset managers to work with smaller, more agile, more specialized firms and platforms like ours. At the same time, and this is to your question, Tamara, we also see pretty large asset managers and very traditional asset owners to move into the space, either in partnership with companies like ours, and or investing in funds like ours, or establishing their own platforms and capacity in that space. And I would like to highlight just one example, which is BlackRock's and Temasek's decarbonization partnership joint venture. You don't really find two larger players in their fields, but they have actually set up a earmark to be $600 million or up to $1 billion venture capital fund, targeting exactly the type of companies that we are targeting, albeit at the later stage, one stage later than ourselves, and that's exactly how we can work very well together. Us deploying a couple of million US dollars up to $10 million US into such deals, and them coming into a later round as an extremely valuable partner. But we also see corporate venture capital funds emerging in the space, and I could give a very long list of examples, but I like to highlight one, not to advertise or demean anyone else's efforts in the market, but Total, which is a French big energy player, has been investing in decarbonizing and decarbonization related technologies for many years right now, and they have specifically within that mandate an Asia platform, or an Asia Pacific platform. So I would say even a company that we don't expect necessary or don't associate decarbonization related investments have been investing in our space as well for many years now, and they are once again a great partner to have for a platform and for a fund like ours. And the list is actually very long and growing longer. Just a couple of days ago, I had the pleasure to meet with an investor, an asset owner in the steel and cement space in Southeast Asia, a pretty significant player, and they have been investing in decarbonization themselves and the carbon markets for more than a year now. So I believe the awareness of how big an opportunity it is for industry players and also for national governments to engage in decarbonization related technologies for competitive reasons, for regulatory reasons, have been emerging over the past couple of years, definitely globally, and more recently also in Asia Pacific, which is amazing. And just on that note, I would like to share a fun fact that when we started working on the Carbonless thesis around 2 years ago, there was only Bhutan as a country in Asia Pacific that had a net zero carbon neutral target, and right now the list of such countries is so long that I won't even start listing them out. But thankfully also Singapore, where I am right now, is part of that. Japan, South Korea, China, Hong Kong, Saudi Arabia. These countries represent almost 50% of the world's CO2 emissions. So it is an incredible wave of commitments, an incredible wave of awareness, and it will be an incredible wave of investments that come into decarbonizing technologies. And last but not least, I would like to also highlight family offices, because we know many of them, and we work with many of them, and in some cases they represent very big conglomerates in Asia Pacific, and not only we don't only talk about small-ish family offices, but nonetheless, even small-ish family offices have been increasingly building capacity to engage in both impact-related investments and also technology investments. And some family offices have built as good capacities and networks and know-how in the space as venture capital funds or smaller venture capital funds, and they can manage their related investments very, very well, either as a single family office, as a multi-family office. So this is a great wave of innovation in the space and openness in the space that we are very happy about. And as a consequence, we see a lot of people in the region, and a lot of companies, a lot of investors, a lot of asset owners that we can work with. And perhaps, Tamara, I don't want to take too much airtime. I can answer your talent gap question separately, but let's perhaps listen to what Manish has to say, or yourself.
Yeah, Manish, what would you like to? I think Tony has sort of set a lot of sparklers up in our brains right now. I think there's quite a lot we can respond to. Do you have any immediate thoughts? So I think we might not be able to hear from Manish at the moment, but Tony, I'm going to jump in because you did kind of get those synapses firing on my side, because we're just ending on innovation, and you mentioned Temasek, and one of the things that I do find interesting right now in the asset owner space is the ability or the effort I'm seeing made by asset owners to really innovate with their mandates. So earlier on, we spoke about the mandate challenges, and as we got to the talent gap, which yes, let's keep that till later. And it's been interesting for me to see people like Temasek, investing in Leapfrog. I see the leveraging of PE mandates by, for those who have them, by people like Franklin Templeton, where I think Ben Meng and Ann Simpson have just announced the Climate Alpha Opportunity Fund. So they're going direct and getting hands dirty as well, where before potentially they were a little bit constrained. You mentioned the governments and family offices, and on an earlier panel, we spoke a bit about how we're seeing some innovation in our models. So things like blended finance, where there's so much potential now to bring together the investors who have different profiles: governments, family offices, asset owners, asset managers, pension funds. And when I think about that, and what Manish was saying earlier about the iterative nature of innovation, I was lucky enough to be invited to speak at COP26. And one of the things we talked about was blended finance and the difficulty we were starting to see now with the risk reward distribution for the investors in place, where the longer term investors, such as the government and the philanthropy side of families, potentially saw an uneven distribution. And so one of the things I would say is what's good about these emerging models is innovation is incremental, it is iterative. And so now there's so much work underway to examine the challenges in the solutions that emerge, to try and break them down and overcome them. And so with things like the risk reward distribution, we are seeing people explore potential solutions to address that, so that we can help scale these alternative solutions that are meeting some of the needs, but not quite all of them. And some of the solutions that we're seeing there are actually being driven by technology innovations, going back to square one on this conversation, where the potential for smart contracts, IoT, blockchain, DAOs, if we ever get there, we're all kind of examining what the future might bring and readying ourselves now to be in that structure. I see Manish is back with us, and Manish, I don't know whether you had a chance to hear us or think about the nature of innovation that we're seeing today. Is there anything you'd like to chip in with?
Yeah, I apologize. Yeah, so, I think just on the earlier part, I also want to highlight that a lot of the innovation actually, and I think Tony alluded to Total and the likes, I see that happening within the companies themselves, within the corporates themselves. And I think they tend to be, in my opinion, better stewards in a lot of cases. Certainly in the process side of things, just going back to my earlier framework, but also on the product side. I would take a very banal, long-standing example of Taiwan Semiconductor, TSMC. For the longest time, they've been actually improving the geometries of the semiconductors, which are very important because as we get smaller and the smartphones become more compact and more operational. And I think that's the example of innovation where you give as an asset allocator, both as an owner and a manager, you allocate capital or invest capital in a corporate that is the cutting edge or the leader in its field or industry. And they are then able to make that allocation of capital within their framework on both process innovation as well as coming up with new products as we go along. So, of course, we need on the product side of things for the disruptors. And I would actually distinguish. A TSMC would not typically go out and kind of invest in something that basically questions its own business model. So I think that's where I think the corporates themselves on one hand as recipients of capital and allocating it towards innovation, and then the disruptors which are funded by independent agencies, venture capitals, I think they form a good complement. So the problem at the headline level sounds very very insurmountable or complex. But at the practical level, I think there's, as long as you have the right framework and the system in mind, it's not that big a challenge, in my opinion. Sorry, I'll stop there.
I think what you mentioned about how, well, so two things there. So having been a public markets type investor on that side of the fence, rather than the private equity side of the fence or private market side of the fence, what you're saying really resonates for me, because it does reflect the role that public markets can play in signaling interest, support for certain types of company profiles. I think one of the difficulties I see with the way public markets does that is it's not always clear why we invest. And so, what I'm seeing now, where the asset owners and investors who are in that space are being a little bit more obvious about their investment strategies, right? So we see it now with the direct indexing solutions that are out there, where men on the ground directing their pension fund money into specific companies with a green label or green rating are able to indicate their interest and their purpose. And the purpose point is actually where I'm hoping to go to next. So one of the things that does become a bit tricky for many corporates and for investors as well is this question around that you raised, Manish, around, you have to look at your own business model and your reason for existence. And, Tony, you mentioned that you work with things like the built environment, and it can be really difficult for some of these industries to really reconcile their business purpose or their business model with their role as members of humanity and the part they play in the planet. People often say the best solution for the built environment is to stop building, rather than keep throwing up new buildings. And I wonder how how your conversations in that space have gone.
With regards to the built environment and the infrastructure and buildings.
Sorry, if I may take a minute.
Go ahead, Manish.
I just wanted to respond to Tamara's public equity over. Just a quick on the public equity aspect. Apologies. On the public equities aspect, or public markets, actually both bonds and equities, which does not lie, in my opinion, it's a capability gap, and I think our dependence or our very, very sort of trivial anyways is really in the context of just the public market investors are really relying on in a large number of cases ESG ratings and very, very commonplace stuff. I think if you were and I think many investors do, if you engage with the companies and had a good insight into how they're allocating capital towards innovation, towards a lot of the facets we discussed. And I think there is a big difference. I mean, there's a very big difference between how Anhui Conch Cement, which is the largest Chinese cement company, goes about reducing or investing in emission reductions versus a Holcim or a Heidelberg, who have so far displayed a greater awareness and a greater urgency towards changing that. And I think if the capital is allocated accordingly, or at least driven by that, then I think some of this challenge can be surmounted. Sorry, I interjected. Tony, over to you. And I think just that reliance and that capability development within the asset manager and asset owner space can actually help channelize capital in a more targeted and in a more discerning fashion, in my opinion. Sorry.
Yeah, I think the discernment point is quite important. And actually, going back to where we were, when we talk about built environment now, there's so much conversation about regenerative finance and designing for regeneration. So although I did throw the gauntlet down, Tony, with is the answer no? I thought I'd open that up for the potential.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, but obviously in an environment, in a global environment where we have a significant housing crisis and housing shortage, and still a growing population and large number of people living in slums. I do not think that not building is an option. It's a question is how we build and what we build and how we operate the buildings that we actually build. And I have a very a fun case study that I like to highlight. We've been in various conversations with both public and private players that are involved in the first metro line development of Manila. And that's an amazing case study, because we could of course choose not to build a metro line, because that has a negative impact on the carbon footprint. But obviously, the benefits outweigh the negatives, and obviously we need more than one metro line in Manila to solve the various crises that the city faces from a transport perspective and mobility perspective. But how we build that metro line can define how other metro lines are actually built in the future in Manila, and that can be efficient or it can be not efficient. And if we build an efficient metro line, the benefits will be embedded in that development and in future developments for decades to come. And if we choose the wrong technologies, and obviously this relates back to the theme of our panel, if we don't use the benefits and the best practices of the fourth industrial revolution and decarbonizing technologies, then bad practices and bad operations will be embedded for decades to come. So it is how we build and how we operate. And the technologies are out there. Building energy management systems are out there. It's a choice to make, and there are amazing business models that incentivize asset owners and building maintenance companies to apply those technologies. So I think there's a choice to make. The governments obviously can contribute to the proliferation of such technologies and solutions and practices via regulation, and it is happening more and more.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's happening more and more very quickly. So,
Yeah.
I alluded to regenerative finance just now, where, you're drawing on everything like biomimicry and conscious design with a long-term outcome that interconnects all aspects of our ecosystem: education, healthcare, all these things that you've alluded to, transport and the like. And the other part I find quite exciting as a potential investment approach that is gaining momentum but not yet gaining scale is the concept of systems or place-based investing, where Climate Kick in Europe, especially, where they have the European mission for the 100 smart cities by 2030, smart and sustainable cities. You can see so much progress being chipped away at, being made at an incremental level. People adjusting all the time for new science, for new approaches, new technologies. When it comes to housing, and I talked earlier about no buildings, I am also quite impressed by people like Dunia, who have come up with really low-cost, sustainable, affordable housing that is also carbon neutral most of the time, or even carbon negative some of the time. I mean net positive, carbon negative.
Correct.
Always computers.
Yeah.
I'm conscious that before I move us into the next sort of theme in our conversation, I just want to highlight to our audience, thank you for staying with us. We have another 10 minutes or so left in this conversation. Do feel free to pose challenging, hard, difficult, existential questions to us. We're up for the challenge. The other challenge that we're up for, I think, in this group is thinking about scale, because scale, of course, can present challenges in itself, not just in getting it, but if you're there trying to fix specific issues, it's sometimes difficult to keep the real problem at hand being an overall crisis for 20, 30 or 50, and driving the impacts that we need, as opposed to deploying solutions that fix part of those overall problems. So as we do deploy more resources into our various projects, how do we think about maintaining consistency in what we're trying to get out of these things? Manish, perhaps if I could turn to you, to talk to us a little bit about how we can measure and evaluate the impact and our investment opportunities.
Sure. Again, I may sound repetitive in this regard, but there is a bit the ISSB and generally disclosure in the public market, in publicly listed companies, or even unlisted large corporates that file disclosure. That is an easier way to monitor and assess changes and improvements and progress. Um, it's definitely much harder in terms of both resources and expertise to actually monitor progress with the smaller companies. And I think that's where, again, you have to really look at the venture capital firm or the private equity firm that's kind of channelized investment to engage with these companies or the recipients of capital for the monitoring. And again, I go back to the whole sort of process, product, large company, small company dimension, and really say that it's far, relatively speaking, far easier to do it in the public company, large company process innovation space. And unfortunately, that's the large part of the economic activity, and really sort of look at more specialized, again, within the global disclosure frameworks, but more specialized evaluation by specialists in the product innovation, smaller scale, companies or recipients of capital space.
I don't think that sounds repetitive at all. I think what's important at this point is acknowledging that so many of us are facing similar challenges at different parts of the value chain. In the earlier panel I spoke on, we talked a bit about how difficult it can be for people to access carbon solutions right now. So going back to the corporates that you've seen taking action yourselves, and like for many people, the carbon capture solutions, as an example, are just not very accessible to them if you're a SME operating within a country, for example. And for thinking about the other kinds of innovation that we sometimes see, going back to product and process, and the stories that Tony was sharing earlier with his some great examples we've seen of corporate innovation. What I'm finding, what I respect deeply and admire, are people like BP and Qantas, who came together to invest quite a lot of money in R&D for sustainable jet fuel. So those kinds of organizations have the capability and capacity to invest in themselves, to try and pave the way for their industry's future, but not everybody does. And so one of the challenges I think we face, and I think Manish, you've highlighted this, is how do you bring that to the people? And speaking of bringing things to the people, the part that we hadn't quite gotten to yet was what we do even within our own industry to address, sort of the skills that might not yet be there, the practices that might not be there, to help bridge some of this distinction between public investing, private investing, impact investing. How do we share as an industry what best practice might look like, what we think it is, so that we can all kind of grow at a greater pace together? So Tony, I know that Carbonless put some work into this. I think you're quite willing to share your expertise. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, thank you for the question, and for queuing me and Carbonless in for this, because it is core to our thesis to work with big corporations, investors, and basically anyone that either is committed or pressured to engage in decarbonization, either through applying and deploying new technologies or even investing in them. Obviously, that is what we would like to encourage more players to do. But at the same time, it is a journey. It is a journey for everyone. And I highlighted one steel and cement industry player in the region that has been decarbonizing. Many others have not and are not yet, but most likely will have to, and will want to, and will want to explore. And we would like to keep the door open for everyone to engage and participate in investment opportunities, and also in just simply technology opportunities and learning opportunities. And the way we do this has two buckets, apart from obviously opening up our fund for investment for interested and relevant parties, because ultimately we are really working with strategic investors that have a skin in the game, in terms of they have to and they are pressured to decarbonize, or they just want to. However, we are also working with big corporations that want to just learn about the space through our various innovation programs that we run under the Carbonless Asia Challenge, where we bring together a group of big industry players that have a decarbonization agenda, or we help them define a decarbonization goal that can be addressed through technology innovation. We source technology companies globally, and we very quickly business match the two parties to see whether there's an opportunity for scale and growth and partnerships. Now, for us selfishly as an investment fund, obviously this is an amazing way to develop our pipeline, develop our partnerships, but at the same time, the spillover effect is significant from a learning and awareness building and capacity building perspective for the various players. And for that reason, we also run a series of thought leadership events. We've also written a book that we are about to publish about how to decarbonize Asia Pacific through technology and innovation. So all the research that we are doing, and many investment funds just keep for themselves, we are actually sharing because we feel it is beneficial for us, it's beneficial for the ecosystems, and it's quite frankly necessary to achieve the kind of a critical mass of players and capital that is necessary to reach the decarbonization targets that we all have to hit. So this is, just in a nutshell, this is what we do, and our platform is very open. We are also establishing centers of excellence, and we are conceptualizing the Carbonless Asia Innovation Hub here in Singapore, also in Hong Kong and in the Middle East, to help technology companies grow from those hubs, and people that are related and relevant to these technologies and to these sectors can also come together to share know-how and find ways to work together. So that's our way to contribute to the development of this.
Yeah, if I very quickly sort of add to that, just picking on both what Tamara, and I know I'm conscious running out of time. So on the corporate side of things, strategic investing, as well as identifying opportunities and talent gap, I think a lot of them can be addressed simultaneously. If we look at how the tech industry, the traditional tech industry, has gone about taking innovation forward, where you can't build, then you buy. And in fact, the Apples and the Microsofts of the world have been acquiring scores of companies over the years, and the rest, where instead of buying something, they'd go in and buy. Instead of building something, they'd go and buy an innovator, bring in the team, and induct that into their own value chain. And I think this is a model that we can apply to the traditional industries more widely, because I think the corporations themselves, as I've sort of mentioned a couple of times earlier, are very aware of the pros and cons of different technologies, different processes, and they also have the expertise. So it's then becomes an introduction networking challenge much more than the rest of the issues. And I think that's where again, firms like Tony's can help, but a traditional investment banking setup or a networking setup can be as effective in introducing the equivalent of SME, single person innovator, to a large corporate, whether it's in the oil and gas space or cement or steel or a host of other industries. So that's how I would actually look at that as a solution or as a model. Sorry, let me stop there.
No apologies at all. In fact, I'm grateful, because that very much leads me to what People-Centered Internet has been doing, where we try to bring together thought leaders at ground level, practitioners, but then also go to the policymakers. And I'm going to use this closing opportunity to respond to Boonchi's question around what my thoughts are on digital assets, crypto, and decentralized finance from a sustainability perspective. That holds purpose and meaning, whether it's good or evil. If it's good, should we be investing into it? And so in summation, because I think this question gives us the opportunity to do that, I'm going to tell the origin story of the People-Centered Internet, which was co-founded by one of the founding fathers of the internet, Vint Cerf. And when concepts like crypto, decentralized finance are formed, and like the internet, there is not really ever an intention to be evil. Most people come into things hoping to do good. And what then happens, of course, is as economies evolve, as systems change, some things get purposed or used in a way that might not be ideal for the system in which they're operating. And to go specifically to the digital assets, crypto, and decentralized finance question, which I'm going to summarize as a blockchain question, that's, blockchain came up with strong intentions around trust. And over time, it's been discovered that the way blockchain was implemented, proof of stake versus proof of work, for example, might not be the best thing for sustainability. What gives me hope is this journey that innovators are on, where we're constantly iterating, trying to be better than we were before. If I look at what used to be called Ethereum 2.0, which has the potential to be much cleaner than Ethereum originally was, and I think it's now been rebranded to Ethereum upgrades or something along those lines, the industry is responding to the voice of the people calling for more sustainable long-term solutions as the science is evolving. And that is what gives me hope. I'm conscious that we're just about on time. I would really like to thank the panel, particularly Manish, who I think had some struggles technology-wise. Tony, thank you very much for all your insights and input. I would also, of course, like to thank the Asset Owner Symposium themselves, Adrian Lawler and the team, for having us here today. Thank you all very much. I'm 1 minute over. I'm going to stop talking. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.